Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all here and ask Professor Walid Hasboun to offer some introductory remarks.
Well, I just wanted to welcome you all here to AUB. I'm Walid Hasboun, Professor of International Relations. I direct the Center for Arab and Middle East Studies. This event this panel is being co-organized by the EU delegation in Lebanon and AUB, sponsored by the Center for Arab and Middle East Studies, the Department of Political Studies and Public Administration, and the Issam Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. So I want to thank all of our panelists and our moderator, Michael Hudson, and also thank the audience for coming. I find in these events often the engagement with the audience is one of the most critical aspects of such an event, and very proud to be able to host this panel and open discussion on these critical questions with such an audience as well as such a distinguished panel. And I'll hand the floor over to the ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Walid. Thank you to the panelists. Just a few words of really us appreciating we can do this here at the AUB, very distinguished university. Very pleased that we can have this debate. We look obviously forward to your comments, your inputs. Our comments will be very, very brief. And I think for as much as we can say, it's a good mix of academics and diplomats. Diplomats who usually can't say too much, but academics who can just freewheel, and then we have to come in and say if it's true or not. I'm glad to see some of my colleagues also from the member states here. That's just great. And I would suggest we start and we take our brief comments and then take as much as possible questions and answers from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have the privilege of moderating this session, and the title could not be more timely. Prospects for peace in a troubled region. I'm not quite sure when the International Day of Peace actually falls, but it seems as if this is a particularly tough year to have an International Day of Peace when there seems to be so much conflict, particularly in this region. And that, I think, is the topic of our panel this morning. I'd like to briefly introduce the four speakers. They're going to each speak for 5 minutes or so, and then they're going to have some discussion among themselves on the issues that will have been raised, and then we will, of course, open it up for dialogue and interaction and discussion with you in the audience. Let me start first with Her Excellency Angelina Eichhorst, who is the head of the EU delegation. She has a very distinguished career, and she's had a great deal of experience in the Middle East. She comes from the Netherlands. She has degrees in international law, human rights, law of international organization, and she has been the head of political and economic affairs for the EU delegation to Syria. She has worked in Jordan. She has carried out assignments, of course, in Brussels as well. So she will have, I think, a very important comment to make. Mr. Jean-Paul Chamy, to my far right, is a Lebanese peace builder. He has his degrees from in conflict studies from the European Peace University, from the Lebanese American University. He's been a visiting fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace. He has participated in citizenship and public affairs programs at Syracuse University, which will be good news to our other panelist, Ami Khouri, who is a strong booster of Syracuse University. Mr. Shami runs peace labs, and so he's working in conflict, as he was telling me earlier, on, as we might say, on the micro level, whereas many of our other colleagues on this panel are working at the national or the regional or indeed the global level. We're honored to have His Excellency the Ambassador of Cyprus to Lebanon, Homer Mavromatis, who comes to us with a bachelor's degree from New York University and advanced degrees from the Institute of Higher European Studies in Strasbourg. He has quite a distinguished career in the Cypriot Foreign Service. He has been a minister plenipotentiary since 2004. He has worked at the Cyprus Embassy in Athens. Lately, before coming to Lebanon, he was ambassador of Cyprus to Serbia, also accredited to Montenegro. He's received a number of decorations and orders as well. So I think, as you can see, our guests from outside the Institute are quite impressive. And then, of course, we have the guest from inside the Institute, who is not really a guest at all. He's the director, or now the former director, of the Issam Faris Institute of Public Policy and International Affairs, and that is Rami Khouri. They did not provide me with any biographical information for Mr. Khouri, but happily, I have known him for more years than we would care to recall, and he is, of course, a very influential and celebrated and respected commentator on world affairs. His column is read, I know, very widely. Certainly in Washington it is read, in many other places. And he has played, of course, a role as the founding director of this institute, which I think has a very bright future ahead of it. There's only one thing wrong with Rami Khouri, and that is, as I alluded to earlier, he seems to have come from Syracuse University. I come from Georgetown University, and the rivalry between Georgetown and Syracuse, especially in basketball, is legendary. And we have a little bet going between us that whoever wins the top prize in basketball in a particular season has to be treated to dinner by the other guy whose team didn't win. I think you owe me maybe a dinner or two.
You can see from my size that I've had more dinners than.
So, without further ado, let's turn to the subject at hand. And I believe that the order of presentation will start with Rami Khouri. Then we'll proceed with Jean-Paul Shami. Then we'll have Ambassador Mavromatis, and finally Ambassador Eichhorst. So about 5 minutes apiece, please.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for coming, and the SPA and you and everybody who's involved in arranging this. I just will make a couple of quick comments in 5 minutes max, to try to suggest that at any level that you look at, whether it's ISIS, new war against ISIS, Iran, Saudi Arabia conflict, internal to Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, any level of analysis you do, whether it's global, regional, national, or very local, I think there are some common denominators that explain why this region, in recent years in particular, has been so erratic, so chaotic and violent in many cases, and in some cases disintegrating. The structures of statehood are disintegrating in some cases. And I think the basic reason, from my 45 years of covering these issues, writing about them and analyzing them and trying to understand them, is that there has never been, in any Arab country, without exception, there has never been a process by which ordinary citizens define their state and define the nature of their citizenship and define the relationship between the citizen and the state. That has never happened in any serious way. You've had elites like in this country, or the Gulf countries, Egypt, or other places, you have indigenous people make their governments, but local, ordinary people never have a role in this. They didn't define their country. In many cases, they didn't create their countries. They were given to them by retreating European powers or invading local tribal powers or some combination of the two. They didn't shape their countries. They didn't define their values. They didn't create their government systems. They didn't establish mechanisms of accountability. And they didn't touch on any of the critical issues that seem to be so important to people all over the region. The role of the military, the nature of civil society, the role of and rights of women and minorities, the relationship between Arabism and other ethnic or national identities, the issue of secularism versus religiosity, the relationships between Arabism and Zionism, the relationships between Arab countries and foreign powers. None of these huge issues, each one of these is a massive issue, and not on any of these issues have ordinary people actually had a say in any serious way. The only exception being some process going on in Tunisia now, which is starting to allow ordinary people's views to shape their country. So the severe disjunction between citizen and state, the lack of a clear consensus that is grounded in the legitimacy that comes from the participation of ordinary citizens, I think is the fundamental underlying reason why this region is so erratic and violent and lacks peace. The weaknesses inherent in this were hidden for 50 years because of the Cold War, because of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and because of the impact of massive oil and development. And from the 30s to the 80s, from 1930s to 1980s, the Arab world was doing pretty well in developmental terms, and therefore you didn't have popular revolutions. People were getting improvements in their lives. No democracy, but life was improving until the mid-80s when this turned. And basic conditions and well-being of ordinary citizens measured in GDP per capita, in poverty line, and access to equitable services, quality of education, and healthcare, whatever measure you use, water availability. From the mid-80s to now, it's been a downhill trend because population growth has vastly exceeded economic growth, and therefore there's been mass pauperization, marginalization, and vulnerability all across the region. And what you see is what you see now, people turning to any kind of group or movement that will protect them, give them identity, give them hope, give them food, give them security to walk in the street with their kids and not be killed by somebody next door or by an invading foreign power. So you get all kinds of institutions emerging, family groups, tribal groups, religious groups, ethnic groups, militias, criminal gangs, commercial syndicates, international NGOs, local tribal-based powers, and now groups like ISIS, or you have things like the Mahdi militia in Iraq and Shabab in Somalia. And there's all of these many hundreds of different kind of groups that are essentially filling the role that the state should play, to link the citizen to the state. And that, to me, is the underlying problem. And as the state pulls back from fundamental responsibilities of provision of services, opportunity to express your identity, and a sense of hope for the future, and basic security. If the state doesn't fulfill those roles, it starts pulling out of society and leaves others to play those roles. And this is what you see. You have governments now that control parts of their countries, but not all the countries, because other people are fulfilling those roles. And this creates great tension. When you add to it the continuous problems of the Arab-Israeli conflict, the humiliation of the continuous humiliation of Arab countries and the occupation and expansion. When you have the Arab-Israeli conflict combined with this, and the continuous experience of foreign armies coming in and attacking us, or participating in our lives, and not just Western ones, because you have some cases Russian involvement, Iranian involvement, or other involvement that's not indigenous Arab. And when you have these foreign, but it's mostly Western ones, mostly British and American and French, historically. But the point is the fundamental sovereignty of these states is weak. The role of the citizen is unclear, and the ability of sovereign countries to simply provide basic protection and life opportunities is diminishing, and this is what you end up with. People taking guns and fighting each other, thinking they're going to at least protect their family and their neighborhood. So that strikes me as one possible explanation for this very pervasive sense of instability and violence. But we know if that's the reason, then there's an easy solution: to get citizens involved in running their countries, move towards more participatory systems, more equitable systems. And people know how to do this because they've done this for thousands of years at the local level in this region. So this is I think, the focus of the movements to the future to make things better should figure out how do you get the citizen of the state in a more natural, mutually productive, advantageous relationship.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker actually deals on the local level with citizens. He is Mr. Jean-Paul Chamy, Director of East Labs. And so the floor is yours now.
Thank you. First of all, it's both a pleasure and a privilege to be featuring today on this panel. And this somehow adds a lot of responsibility on my young shoulders. Now that we know that there are a lot of initiatives happening in Lebanon on peace building. So I'll try to both present on what our organization is doing and how we are perceiving the next coming wave of threats, but perhaps from a more microscopic perspective, since we've decided to give our organization the name of a peace lab. And that's also to acknowledge that there's a lot for us to learn in that regard. And there's a lot to be tested, tried, and shared, which is probably a model that we're not seeing quite enough of or often in the Arab world and in our country here in Lebanon, whereby we always try to tackle collective problems rather on an individualistic level or individually, which we tend to diagnose as one of the key impediments to peace, at least from the perspective of local actors working on the local level. First of all, our work has been supported by several donors, embassies, and so on, but the bulk of it has been supported mainly by the EU. And this is a word of thank you to the EU's constant support and long-term commitment to this quote-unquote business, the business of building peace, which is something that cannot but be perceived as a long-term engagement and long-term commitment. We are running currently a program that is building peace on the local level in the north of Lebanon, with the focus on Akkar, and also with some work being currently done at the level of the Palestinian camp in the Bedawi region. This is also being supported by some partners. One of them is EDCI in Brussels. This is also another acknowledgement that we always need to do two things: to import some of the knowledge that is already available in the West and those different Western models and frameworks, but also a call for us Lebanese and local communities to develop our own perceptions and our own models of thinking and looking at conflict and how we could possibly be addressing that. In terms of the perceptions of how we are looking at things, at least from our smaller angled, smaller microscopic world, if I may say, of course, when it comes to how we are looking at security, it's very obvious that this year, or the past 2 years at least, have witnessed an increased number of security incidents that are constantly hindering the progress of our work. So in a more operational or technical sense, if we need to travel to Akkar or to certain localities in Lebanon, this has been a major hustle, which is also requires us to re-question as well how we are doing things, and also look again at the possibilities of cooperating and working together. Another major impediment to our work here in Lebanon, even amongst peace-building organization, is the very lack of ongoing conversations and ongoing collective strategic building and planning towards having at least a more felt impact. So far, I think most of our work, including ours to actually start with, is pretty much scattered and pretty much less impactful than if we were able to put all of our efforts together and have a better and more felt weight in the quest for peace. On the level of our perception of how things are looking like on the social and societal level, it's very, very obvious that during our many trips and constant presence in specifically in the north of Lebanon, we have definitely been feeling that people are further alienating themselves from being part of this common vision of Lebanon, of a country, and a lot of resentment that has been fueled and building up since many years, many decades now. So a lot of people already really expressing their anger, their fear, their anxiety, but also some of them expressing their willingness to embark on a maybe different journey or on a different vision that might not necessarily coincide with the more unifying journeys that I think many of us are calling upon and hoping to see happening in Lebanon. Of course, the influx and the increased number of Syrian refugees in Lebanon has brought us to some realizations and some potential conclusions that we don't really know what we are dealing with. And there's a lot, I think, of joint analysis that need to be done, a lot of scenario building and a lot of planning, I think, that need to be definitely at hand, because this is the next coming wave of conflict. And our problem today that we are looking at when we work on the local, more microscopic level, is that we have already seen different layers of conflict piling, on top of each other. And now the conflict is not very much easily articulated, that it's a conflict that is being fueled by conflicts since many decades. So the question for us is, and the big dilemma is, how do we tackle a next coming wave of conflict that we don't really know what it is, while we haven't really been able to successfully jointly, at least collectively, diagnose the actual waves or layers of conflict that have preceded this coming one. So we do say that, inshallah, hopefully we are totally wrong. Of course, it's not really nice to have a very pessimistic look at these things. But whether we like it or not, we cannot be superstitious the way we are Lebanese and Arab cultures in general. And we cannot just look the other way by saying, everything is going to be fine, we don't need to be It's not about being superstitious. I think it's a reality check that I think we all need to look at jointly together. So yes, I think my small message today is definitely geared towards those peace-building actors, be it agencies, internationals, locals, and all of us good and well-intentioned people, to eventually acknowledge that we will have to let go of a lot of egos, of a lot of, I know what to do, and a lot of individualistically built and generated options and solutions. Cast them a little bit aside and try to somehow look for ways to jointly design ways, approaches, and strategies to tackle this very big ocean of conflicts that we can't really impact much, but unless we focus on building our local capacities and building on what we already know. And maybe my very last message today is that we already know a lot on the individual level. In Akkar, we've been taught a lot. We're calling ourselves peace labs because we're coming from a perspective that says that we know very little. And it is about time to listen. So also the listening component is very much important. And it cannot be done but through a long-term commitment. So it's also a bit of an outcry or a little bit of a message to donors and to different agencies that can provide the support, the financial, but also the technical and the know-how, is to be more engaged in the longer term and to give such initiatives the capacity to run for as many years as needed. A problem that is 30, 40, 50 years old cannot be addressed in 1 or 2 years by 1 or 2 small actors. It has to be a bigger initiative, a more collective effort. And this is probably one of the missions why Peace Labs was created, is to try to connect, to glue different initiatives together in one way or another, and also maintain 2 different tracks of communications and conversations. A horizontal one amongst the local actors, but also a vertical one that should be eventually engaging donors and the national level, media, and all of the different agencies as partners rather than just be, seeing them as a resource that we can only tap into. It's a collective effort that we are calling for, and we are hoping that at some point this collective consciousness about that will be sufficiently raised in our dear country. Thank you again for having me, and I really look forward to some of the questions, the critical thinking that can definitely help us do a better type of job, but also get us to also connect to some of you who might be interested in supporting the type of work that we are hoping to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's a useful structure to imagine the horizontal need for resolving conflict, as well as the vertical problem of linking to the higher levels, to the higher authorities, which is always a problem in this part of the world. Our third commentator is Ambassador Mavromatis, the ambassador from Cyprus to Lebanon. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to start maybe by saying that the International Day of Peace is celebrated for the last 30 years on the 21st of September. The special theme of this year is the rights of people to peace, a right which we have seen that especially in this region is under threat. What I would like to concentrate on is maybe the experience that my country has had with conflict in the last 40 years. Walking in with Rami, we were kind of making another bet which problem will be solved before, the Palestinian problem or the Cyprus problem. And I do sincerely hope that both problems can be solved the same day if possible, because I think without the solution of all the regional problems and conflicts that exist in the Middle East and more importantly the Palestinian issue, we cannot have a lasting peace in the region. In the case of Cyprus, we're talking about a frozen conflict for the last 40 years, whereby Cyprus has managed without any further hostilities after 1974 to prosper as a country, to join the European Union in 2004, to join the Euro in 2008, and try within the European Union also to play a role as an actor, knowing especially this region, because we are the closest country to the Middle East, the closest country to Lebanon, and as we do know pretty well one another, we try to bring that added value of the closeness and the experience we had over thousands of years. In the case of Cyprus, we have chosen since 1974, since the year of the invasion, negotiations. Negotiations were taking place even before the invasion to solve the intercommunal conflict, and they're continuing until now. Only one day ago, the two leaders of the communities met. They issued another joint communique that they will be entering into the third phase of the current process, even though the outlook is not very bright. This, we have seen that this is the only way forward. You cannot solve an issue through conflict. You need to try through negotiation, and this is where it brings the role of diplomats, who are exactly there to provide a different form of negotiation, a different form of conflict solving, that of negotiation. I think if we put together the resolutions on the Cyprus problem, on the Palestinian problem, and on the Lebanese problem, I mean, if you just take the UNIFIL, all the UNIFIL resolutions that were being issued every 4 months nearly, I think we would need just a year to read through them. But this shows the engagement of the international community in an effort to mediate and solve the problems at hand. I've been here now 4 years. I have to admit that unfortunately the security situation in Lebanon has deteriorated in the last 4 years, not primarily because of Lebanon, but mostly of the conflict in the neighboring countries. But I think that Lebanon has a very good chance to continue with the minimum damage to survive the conflicts in the surrounding region. And this is exactly because of the fact that it has a functioning democratic system, but it needs also at the same time to really address the issues of institution building, and obviously a major item on this agenda, and number one item, is the election of the president, and then further on along the line, the parliamentary elections. I think that strengthening the institutions is a very important aspect of the preparation of Lebanon to survive this conflict with the minimum possible losses. Another issue I wanted to raise, because we are addressing the youth, is that especially in Lebanon, we have a large part of the population which is marginalized economically and socially, and marginalization and poverty together provide the perfect recruits for extremist organizations. And this is a role that Lebanon, together with the help of the international community, can address in the best way possible. I think I will stay at this for the initial comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And our final speaker is Ambassador Angelina Eichhorst, head of the EU delegation to Lebanon. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I would like to focus on 2 points I'm picking up here from the presentations made, and the one I want to make myself first is Europe as a peace project par excellence, but very much what is our international, at the international level, the work that should be done to address exactly the issues mentioned by the panelists, the state building, the civil state building aspects, the disconnect between the citizen and the state. This is very much what we are all, the ambassadors are here working on a daily basis. It was mentioned the different journeys or the different models presented to people today, and we see that across everywhere, and you see really the different models fighting with each other over the hegemony of the people's minds. How to address that. Cyprus as an extremely good example, actually, of peace building by bringing Cyprus into the European Union, but also the elements of long-term engagement needed, joint responsibility, joint reflection, joint actions. These are some of the points I picked up from the speakers here. All of that brings me back to repeating and saying and sharing with you how much we did achieve within the European Union with 28 member states to bring these elements together over the past 60 plus years. And it's been forgotten because peace doesn't get the headlines in the newspapers, and every successful peace project you will simply not read. You may just read at the end of the pages in any newspaper, but not on the front lines. It's no news. And the fact that it is a daily hard job and hard work to maintain the peace, contain threats, or now we are in the methodology or the thinking of destroying again threats, that just slips off people's minds. Within the European Union for long we have taken for granted that our peace project is successful, that we're doing great. Yes, we have economic challenges, financial challenges, social challenges. We will overcome them, and we did overcome a lot. But then suddenly we saw our boundaries threatened and our territory of our neighbors being annexed. And that woke up everybody. Now, if I had been here a year ago, I would never thought I would talk to you about Russia taking in Crimea and declaring that as a legitimate act. I would never have conceived that that would be a possibility even, and very few of us. And that's perhaps one of the issues where we need to look at. How can we better project? Everybody knew the Islamic State was operating, or elements. I don't like to call it Islamic State. We are there with that Rami and ISIS, ISIL, but let's call it something else. But we knew for a long time what people are doing in different territories in Iraq and in Syria. And then it's still quite a surprise, and suddenly that all comes up, and we say, oh, we have a problem here. Look, there are, in trying to address the challenges to peace today, I think where we, on our level, have a main challenge is that there are too many cooks in the kitchen. It's really hard to try and get a crisis, a problem resolved with so many, 40 plus, 60 plus around the table with all very diverse visions. It's simply not easy. Then we have to do with what I call megaphone diplomacy. Everybody comes out after every meeting making huge statements, sometimes very contradictory to what people said inside the room. Basically, media is overtaking what has actually happened inside the room of our way of working. And that doesn't give us a good ground to work. Heading the page 1, as I said, the newspaper, is very difficult. You cannot solve or resolve a crisis when it's constantly on page number 1. It has to go to 2 or 3 in order to make us, at least give us some space to work. And I think we have a contribution there also, because if we don't talk about our work, we are being blamed for not explaining to the public what we do. But if we go out and say what we're doing, it will reflect negatively on our work of peace building. Very, very often a vision is lacking. Let us be very clear. We talk about beautiful strategy, but before the strategy comes to vision, really. Europe has a vision as such of peace building, peacemaking. But each and every crisis needs to have a different approach and a different way of working. To do that, you need to have people. You need to have people everywhere. I mean, we should be mostly present. This is my perspective, but I'm happy to hear the view of the audience. Particularly in fragile states, we should be really present everywhere through the people just mentioned on the ground, trying to really help on moving on these experiences of resolving questions not violently, because it is about the violence we talk, resolving questions peacefully. There are no plans, really, honestly, even for Lebanon. For Lebanon, my question always is, where is your plan? And I ask every politician and every single bureaucrat in this country, but also civil society, also citizens, where is the plan? And even if you have the plan and the vision, it still requires hard work. You cannot just say, I want to become member of parliament in Lebanon, and then sit back. I mean, you have to work for that. That goes to civil society, but even more so, I would say, for politicians. This is bloody, sorry for the language, hard work. So in all of that, the plan, and suppose there is the hard work, what we do really miss today is trust. Because even the peace builders of this work, we don't lead by example. We don't make enough reflections ourselves. And I bring this up constantly also to our own authorities. We have to be able and sit back. If we want to contain a threat, or if we want to destroy a threat, I use contain and destroy because containing is what we're trying to do for Europe now with Russia. Destroying is what people, members of a coalition, try to do with, or will be doing, want to do with ISIS. When we do that, we have to reflect. We have to be able to go back and look, where does the threat come from? What is our own contribution to that? And I can tell you, politicians are not ready to do that. I can say it because I'm not a politician. So, as a diplomat, of course, I am representing our administrations, but I also believe that politicians have a responsibility in guiding all of us in the road to peace. So trust building is important at the local level. Trust building is important at the international level. In diplomacy, I don't need to tell you, but it's very true, people matter. it is very important, in my view, to have the right people on the right place to do the right sort of negotiations. And I want to say it, today the negotiations Iran has with the E3+3, we call them E3+3, we don't say P5+1, chaired by Catherine Ashton. She's the High Representative of the European Union. She's chairing the negotiations. Does anybody know that here? Because you all say it's Iran and the United States. But she's the one chairing them, and she has been doing that for the past year and a half very thoroughly, very, very thoroughly, almost behind the scenes, trying to push and push and push and push. I cannot tell if there is a deal next month in November. Today there is another round of negotiations. But it is important to have people who are out there doing exactly that very hard work. And even if you have the people, still I would tend to think we don't think enough about tactics and strategy. And you also must know in diplomacy and in international work, and Rami knows this very well, who is good on the tactics and who is good on the strategy. And I'm happy to dive in with you into that, because it is extremely important in getting that as part of your analysis of our peace building. Of course, there are many, many more aspects, but my colleague Herma was talking about negotiations. I go further. I talk about mediation. It's very, very important to have the right mediators on the spot. And I can tell you, on the international scene, there are very few, unfortunately. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've all been fortunate to hear four extremely well-informed presentations that illustrate for us the vastness of the problem of conflict and peace building in this part of the world at this particular time. I hope you will all be thinking of questions or comments for the panelists, and I will turn to you in just a moment. But I do want to ask the four speakers here if they could focus some further reflections on where Lebanon is at this moment. We've heard, I think, we've had a very concise, broad exposition of what we might call cascading conflicts, from the global to the regional to the national to the local level. And Lebanon, for better or worse, in some ways is the focus of many of these converging conflicts. So moving from the global, where we see, of course, a sort of balance of power struggle between an Iranian-backed coalition and an American-backed coalition, to the national and regional, where we find, as Rami Khouri was pointing out, a lack of governing capacity, a draining away of political legitimacy, to the very local, well, before we get to the local, the persistence of long-term regional issues that, in a sense, contaminate the atmosphere, Palestine being case in point. And then as we move into the very micro level, as Jean-Paul was telling us, we have to figure out how to mitigate or even solve conflicts within communities to provide the stability for larger peace. So Lebanon today, as we all know, is affected by the ongoing Palestinian issue, by the catastrophe, the ongoing catastrophe in Syria, which has led to over 1 million Syrian refugees coming to this country, to a paralysis of political institutions in Lebanon itself, as Angelina was alluding to, in not an entirely diplomatic way, I think, but that was very good, to the local level. So my question really for all the panelists is, as you look at the Lebanese situation today, with ISIS looming on the horizons, nibbling away at the borders, et cetera,
what concrete advice can you offer Lebanese policymakers? And I'll start. Let us start with Rami, and we'll just quickly run down the table here.
Thank you. I think looking at Lebanon as a non-Lebanese, but having lived here 3 times in my life, and each one of those times in the 50s and the 80s and today, there was some kind of external Western military intervention in or offshore the country. So there are realities that stand out in Lebanon to me over time. The external pressures, the interventions, the involvements, the internal tensions that are there are all offset by one factor that makes Lebanon distinct in the Arab world, which is the almost total freedom of the individual Lebanese to develop his or her talents, to read any book they want, to wear whatever they want to wear, to go to a theater, to dance, to eat whatever they want to eat, to speak out, to live as a normal human being that can use his or her total human faculties, to think, to speak, to debate, to propose, to challenge in a nonviolent way. This is unique in Lebanon. There's no other Arab country where a human being is allowed to use 100% of his or her mind. There's restrictions, whether religious, social, security, political, economic, or tribal, in every Arab country, except Lebanon. There's other constraints in Lebanon. There's other problems. But lack of freedom for the individual is not one of them. And that's one of the reasons, I think, why Lebanon is so resilient over the years. You have this tremendous human talent that we see all the time in Lebanon in all different spheres of life. So I would think that the antidote to the stresses in Lebanon is to reinforce those positive elements that are have proven themselves over the years, which is to maintain an open, pluralistic system that allows the individuals to develop their full talents and go to the next step, which is to, again, to go back to what I said at the beginning, to figure out how do ordinary people get involved in the political process. Because the political process is dominated by elites. And there's about 20 people in the country who basically run the country, and this is how it's been for 30, 40, 50 years. And people seem to be unable to change it, even though sometimes people complain. So I think taking that human talent that's there, the freedom that's there, and expanding the participation of citizens in a political decision-making process.
Thank you. Yes.
I would bring in the 2 elements that always appear in these discussions. For a civil state to be built, functional and successful eventually, you need the 2 elements of functioning institutions and security. And these are the 2 challenges today across Lebanon. And this is where I think all of us collectively, all the, I don't like international community, let's say all the countries involved in all of this, are really, really working on this. You need to have functioning institutions in which people living in Lebanon, not just citizens, but anybody, migrant workers, refugees, can have the trust, can have the feeling that they are protected and respected, that they find the dignity as a human being within functioning institutions. And that's always what I hear when people go to Europe. They say, my God, everything functions. And you know, that's exactly where I think we as member states of the EU should come in most, and we do actually a lot, but you don't always perhaps see it. And the security part, you have over the years a real breakthrough. Unfortunately, it took so long, at least a breakthrough that there is a full understanding how important it is that the Lebanese army, the internal security forces, the general security, but really the army mostly should get the right equipment, the right tools, the right capability and capacity to work and preserve the security of the country. Because that is also a dignity question of the country. So the dignity of the individual and on the country level. And again, on the 2 aspects, we are, you know, we are there and we work and we help and support. But the challenge is so enormous that you may not always see that.
Thank you. And Omar, did you?
Yeah. Last Tuesday, we had the privilege to participate and to follow the inauguration of the Grand Mufti. And I think that the messages we heard there gave us all a renewed hope that at least both the political leadership and the religious leadership in Lebanon are talking in one voice, the voice of reconciliation, of understanding, and the need to prevent extremism from coming into the country. I think this was a very, very important message that I hope will resonate for a longer period and will awaken people to come together and address the challenges. And the challenges were mentioned before by Angelina, is the institutional building and, of course, the need for the functioning of the state and all its institutions and strengthening the army. I think there have been a lot of conferences and a lot of efforts by the international community to do that, and we're beginning to see some trickling down of the results of this effort by the international community, and we hope that this will continue in the future, because without strong institutions and what Rami mentioned before about the beautiful capacities of the Lebanese individual, which is a unique feature of your country, can really help to keep you as much as possible away from the conflicts, and also to project yourselves as a model of possible solutions in the future, when we hope soon there will be no more fighting. But I wanted also just to come back to the issue of peace building. I think that people have forgotten the European history, and we started from the coal and steel industry, where we joined efforts in the production of the two major elements for the creation of a war machine, put them under common control. It was an economic community which turned itself into a peace-building community, especially when we look today, after the accession of Croatia, before Slovenia, and all the other Balkan countries who were at war for quite a few years with terrible consequences in Europe, are now either members or they are on the road to becoming full members of the Union. Even the Cyprus issue, we became members, but Turkey also became a candidate, and we started negotiations. So there's a give and take in all decisions. Many in Cyprus did not like this, but this is the way you have to move forward. If you don't give something, you don't get something in return. And I just wanted to add another vision. I know that now with the conflict in the area is not maybe so relevant, but to think in the future, my foreign minister thinks that oil and gas could play the role of coal and steel in Europe for the decades ahead. And we really think that with the involvement of the European Union in this and promoting this idea of sharing the wealth that lies beneath our sea, we can prosper and provide some of the elements, because without prosperity, you cannot fight. Is the best way to insulate yourself from extremism. And I think that if we are able to manage these resources correctly and equitably between all of us, we can find the mechanisms really for a lasting peace in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then Jean-Paul.
Let's forget the past, everything about the past, so that we move forward. This is a slogan that one Lebanese has developed and printed several posters and scattered around several places in the neighborhood where I live. This is somebody who's running for the presidency. And this is the exact opposite of this is what I would like to suggest to national level decision makers in my country. Yesterday, I've been having some conversations with people that I've met, and they're young. They're very much, vibrant. They want to see that this change. They want to do something about everything that is happening, and they've somehow all, concluded that a country that doesn't have a proper recollection of its own history, doesn't have a proper narrative of it, or at least an agreed upon version of different narratives would still do, is definitely a country that, and here they started calling our country different names in the sense of having a collective amnesia, having multiple personality disorders and so on and so forth, which to a very big extent, I found very, very much interesting. How can we build a common vision if we are all stemming from different perceptions of the vécu, of what has been lived in the many, many years? And also another fear that is normally, as human beings, whenever we are under pressure, we end up going back to our innate reflexes. That is the thing that we feel, the most at ease doing under pressure, of course, in order to, survive or in order to make a quick decision. And it seems that so far we've managed to build very interesting destructive reflexes that is fighting each other. And I think a country that has done that repeatedly, that has at some point got to a big extent desensitized about violence, that we see sometimes even on the micro level, even on the children carrying weapons and fighting and simulating these things and so on, all the way up to being desensitized to the extent that we might be passing by people who are carrying small weapons in their pockets or hand grenades in their cars, or even the big military equipments that we at points we pass them by and we don't even see them, while sometimes our friends visiting from abroad would come and say, "Is this fine? Is this?" And then we say, no, everything is fine. What's so fine about all that? I'm wondering. So I think this is it. Just stopping, if that's even an option, and poking back into the past, and dialoguing and talking and having conversations, collective mass conversations about that. One specific point that I keep referring to in some of the conversations that I have about this very specific topic is this vivid presence and vivid memory that I come across every time I usually take a cab, a service, specifically a service, to go from one place to another. You just need to press the on-off button that most of the service drivers in my country have, and you will hear vivid memories of the different instances where they fought, or they've been victims, or they had to be displaced, and so on and so forth. We are somehow trying to navigate around something that's definitely this past that we all experienced, without ever willing to engage in it, because we do not collectively like to engage in an emotional process. So managing the political space in Lebanon is extremely needed and important. The economic dimension is by far extremely needed and important to be addressed. But also managing the emotional space is very much needed. If not, those scars and wounds, both real, physical, and emotional, that we all carry somehow, will eventually keep bringing us back into the same loop of feeling helpless, hopeless, but most importantly, not being heard. And most importantly, political reconciliation is needed, but also reconciliation as well amongst people is extremely, extremely needed as well. They know of several NGOs, several individuals who are trying to do something about it, but this is also, again, a clear case of a collective problem that should not be dealt with individually. So this would probably be my message to people running the show.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to all of the panelists for their very thoughtful comments on this very troubling situation that Lebanon finds itself in now. And now it's time to open up the conversation to everybody. I'd like you to raise your hand. I'll identify you, and then if you would identify yourself very briefly and ask your question or make your comment as succinctly as possible. Depending on the volume of questions, I may take 2 or 3 or 4 at a time and then ask panelists to respond. So the floor is open.
My name is Andrew. I'm a retired Canadian lawyer who's lived in Lebanon for the past 12 years. And I have a question of the EU representative. prior to the beheading of the 2 Americans, what action had the EU taken in regard to the stopping the flow of money from Saudi Arabia to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other extremist groups, and from also spreading a rather extreme brand, Wahhabism of Islam, not only to Europe, but to North America and to other places in the world? Before you answer the question, I would just like you to note that 2 weeks ago, President Obama advised that some Middle Eastern countries were, in fact, funding ISIS. First time, I think, an American president has admitted that that has happened. Hillary Clinton has written that Saudi Arabia remains a critical financial support base for Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. U.S. Senator Bob Graham, who was the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, has stated that Saudi Arabia has supported ISIS and that the U.S. has turned a blind eye. He says that Saudi Arabia has been the central figure in financing ISIS and other extremist groups and in spreading Wahhabism. Stuart Levy was the Undersecretary of the U.S. Treasury responsible for monitoring and impeding the financing of terrorism, has told ABC News, if I could cut off funding from one country, it would be Saudi Arabia. Alistair
Okay,
Crook.
I think we've got the
Got
general
the
gist
message.
of your comment.
So, what action has the EU taken to stop it? And for Mr. Curry, I read one of your articles recently, and I must say I enjoy all your articles. I read them all, where you dealt with this issue about why would young men be attracted, and you did an excellent job. You went through all of the items, and similar to today. But again, there was no reference to Saudi Arabia financing. And I'm rather curious, given all of this support, why that would be the case. So,
Okay.
to the representative, what have you done to stop it?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a couple more questions, and then there'll be some responses. I think I saw a hand, yes, at the back, please. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Didier Leroy. I work for the Military Academy of Belgium, and I teach at the Free University of Brussels. My question is for Mr. Houri, mostly. The rise of ISIS seems to have opened the window of opportunity for numerous and very different actors in the region to focus on one enemy in a common effort, maybe. In this context, to what extent can we expect some sort of a rapprochement between the 2 main political coalitions in Lebanon? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take one more. Yes, please.
My name is Muayyad. I'm Muayyad Khan. I'm a PS student in AUB, and my question is to the head of the AU delegation, please. You mentioned the word destroy when talking about, or it echoed. The word has been used to describe the coalition's plan regarding ISIS. And I was wondering, okay, destroy, we agree on that, but is the ultimate long-term plan really peace, which is what we're discussing today, or the transfer of conflict into something that doesn't make direct video threats titled Flames of War or whatever about the US or Europe? The other question is relating to the Iraqi unity government. And is that an example of what you mentioned as being megaphone diplomacy or an inflated achievement? The third question is 2 parts, part Iraq and part Syria. Are the underlying social issues or injustices in Iraq that gave the rise to ISIS by the Sunni communities in Iraq going to be addressed by the coalition states or only by the Iraqi unity government? Also, is the administrative and power void in eastern and northern Syria going to be addressed after ISIS is dealt with there?
Okay, thank you. Those are three interesting interventions directed, I think, mainly to Rami and Angelina, but I think our other panelists should feel free to jump in. So would you like to respond to any or all of those comments? Do you want to start?
Thank you. I think it's clearly that there's a problem with Saudi money, Kuwaiti money, UAE money, Qatari money, a lot of money from all over the place. So I wouldn't single out the Saudis as the main culprits, but clearly they are an issue and it has to be addressed, and people are openly speaking about it now. One of the interesting things that has happened in the last 3.5 years since the uprisings began, the Arab uprisings, is that the Gulf countries have now been behaving like real countries. They send their military around, the Saudis send their troops to Bahrain, they send money to rebels in Syria, the Qataris and the UAE have had their air forces in action in Libya, they're sending armaments and money around all over the region to support people they like and to bring down people they don't like. Now, these are controversial policies, but this is what normal countries do. And the Gulf countries didn't do this before. They were not acting like normal countries. They were acting like some distinct phenomenon, which is a modern phenomenon of oil and young nationhood. But now they're acting like normal countries, and including what the Saudis and others are doing, they're sending a lot of money to the Salafi Takfiri jihadi groups. The irony is that the close ideological, intellectual, theological relationship between the Wahhabis and the ISIS groups is also offset by the fact that the biggest challenge ISIS poses is to Saudi legitimacy as the guardian of Salafi, of Sunni leadership or purity or centrality, whatever you want to call it. The Saudis are the most threatened by ISIS more than anybody else in the long run. But at the same time, they're supporting some of the Saudi individuals, certainly. We don't have a lot of proof of exactly what Gulf governments are doing in terms of sending money to which groups. There's lots of reports. There's very little verifiable evidence. But clearly, there's money moving from the Arabian Peninsula to a lot of these groups, and to Libya and to other places. And this is one of the problems in the region now, because it's very hard to squeeze these groups if they have sources of funding from the region, as well as their indigenous sources now in Iraq and Syria. The question of Iran and Saudi Arabia and Lebanon, the regional tensions possibly being resolved because ISIS is providing a focus for everybody in the region together to fight against ISIS is an important one, and I think it's just way too early to tell. What's clear is that most of the governments in this region, and all of the governments from the West, have acted with a chronic incompetence and incoherence in the use of military power in this region in the last 30 or 40 years that doesn't give us much hope that actually the common threat of ISIS is actually going to resolve some of these tensions. Most of the governments in this region have acted with amateurish, in an amateurish way, I would say. And this is because you look at these countries. Half of the governments don't have legitimacy in half of their own territorial sovereign areas. And they're being challenged by their own people. And the Arab uprisings that happened starting 3.5 years ago was one of the most extraordinary modern developments, where people across 22 countries simultaneously expressed the desire to either remove or to radically reform their own governments. There was massive discontent all across the region. It didn't succeed in a lot, but the expression of massive discontent, I think, is a sign of the problems with some of these governments and the reaction and the policies of these governments in the Arab world particularly is one of the main reasons for the rise of groups like ISIS. If you go back to the 70s, it was the Muslim Brotherhood and then other groups, and gradually you got more radical groups, and finally you got ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda in the last 25 years. The fear I have is that the combination of Western militarism and Arab autocracy working together to defeat ISIS is not going to work, because it is precisely that combination of Western militarism and Arab autocracy that created ISIS, that created the conditions of discontent and marginalization and poverty and hopelessness, which led eventually to extremism and militarization. So you can't have the same people, Western militaries and Arab autocrats who created ISIS, actually be able to fight it, unless you address those underlying conditions. And I was very happy to hear Angelina talk about how politicians are not ready to reflect. And that's exactly what they need to do. Before they start killing, attacking people, which you have to do, you have to use military force at some point. If you've got a group like ISIS ready to take over 5 dams in northern Iraq, you have to beat them back at some point. These are criminals. But you need to beat them back using a strategy that draws the lessons from the failures of the last 40 years of your own policies. And this needs reflecting on, how did these groups emerge? How did these groups come into being? What was the combination of local socioeconomic stress, political subjugation, incompetence in the Arab-Israeli conflict, incoherence of regional Arab integration, total failure in addressing the interaction with the West or the East, complete incoherence and incompetence across the board, I would say, in modern Arab governance systems, which now show their results. If we don't study why that happened, which allowed these Western armies to keep coming at us, we're going to just make the situation worse. And people ask, what could be worse than ISIS? I think it's very clear. If ISIS is defeated, which it should be, and I want it to be, and I think it will be, if ISIS is defeated, but Arab autocratic misrule, corruption, abuse of power, incompetence in addressing Zionism or Western militarism, if all of these issues are not changed and continue the same, there will be something worse than ISIS. And I don't know what it is, but if I was somebody in ISIS's shoes and I get attacked by drones and then I decide to disperse and go underground and come back a few years later, I think the logical thing for these people to do is forget about trying to create an Islamic caliphate and territorialize their grievances and aspirations, but just go completely underground and start attacking Arab and Western targets using mass destruction mechanisms, using chemical warfare. I mean, that's what I think would be the worst thing. You'd have people going around poisoning water supplies in Brussels and Kansas City and Riyadh. I mean, these urban societies are so vulnerable that all you need is one guy with a little vial of chemicals or something, and this is not difficult to do. A lot of these guys are engineers. And so there's many things that could be much worse than ISIS that would try to destabilize entire societies. And that's why I think this reflection that Angelina talked about is so critical, and it needs much more dramatic action on the part of the people of this region, collaborating with friends from around the world to stop the traditions of autocratic, unjust, unstable governance.
Thank you. Briefly on the stopping the flow of money. We had, I think it was in 2012, the visit of our counter-terrorism coordinator here in Lebanon, already bringing together all of the elements of what we saw happening on flows of money together. Him then working very closely with all the ministers of interior within the European Union on getting exactly the agreement to what are the steps needed to stop the flow of money, which we can do within the European Union, of course. I'm talking about the EU, I'm not talking about the United States. And a lot has happened. A lot has happened you can see today in the different member states on a very individual basis how people are being, how do I phrase that? The information that is being collected on the financing, on the individuals, or those who pledge allegiance to terrorism, and that has gone into a roller coaster. I mean, there's now so much cooperation between the different intelligence agencies, the military, the police, the banks, at all levels. It's only a first step. Huh? I don't say much is being resolved there, but that certainly, that cooperation has improved a lot, because we are fully aware, and I fully agree with you. You have to address the financing, definitely. I'm not here to blame any state. You focus on one, but as Rami said, look, you know, there is so much going on that level. We don't even know what governments are doing. We mostly think this is all private money going all over the place. So it's easy to point at one government here or there, and I can name many more than you mentioned. We know it, but that's not the issue. The issue is really that we have to make sure we have the right data on the flows of the money, and we can't stop it. We have the possibility of doing that. It just needs much and much more work. But that brings me to the point you mentioned of the Wahhabism, and as Rami was saying, the reflection point. I do believe, I really truly believe that and that goes for every country. Again, I'm not here for finger pointing, not because I'm a diplomat, but because I'm realistic about everybody sharing responsibility in this. But it is important that within the religious community, there is also that very, very own reflection of how every single community has, over the years, been contributing to the fact that people feel so much victimized and that there's so much injustice, whether it is religious or political. So that is a whole step that needs to be taken. I think we have actually come very, very far in having discussions today on the level you were saying with the Gulf states, with other Arab states. I mean, there has been a lot of improvement. I always look at the glass being half full. That's my job. But it is important to see that. I don't know if there will be a point of a full reflection within Gulf states or elsewhere, but it is important to be done. A peace plan for Iraq, oh gosh, that country definitely needs a peace plan. Definitely, but that Rami has been writing about this, many people for the past 2 decades. I wouldn't call it megaphone diplomacy around the formation of the government. I would not underestimate what is currently going on in Iraq in terms of changes at the highest level of thinking. Had you thought 4 months ago, 5 months after he won the elections, Malki, that he today would not be in where, had you thought? No, you had not thought. I would not have thought it. Although we have been talking about Malki for years, when I was in Damascus and before, and you know, it was always a question mark. But okay, that is part of a process that is that's ongoing, that has the full support, and rightly so, and particularly from Iran. I mean, that's very important to see, not just EU, US, but Iran and the Gulf in all of this. But I'm not sure there is a plan for peace as yet. As I said it in the beginning, why it is so important. And that is the work that needs to be done. Will that be addressed by the coalition? You are asking a lot here, because I want to see what eventually the coalition is going to do, and what eventually will be said the coalition is going to do, and what actually will be done. I think it's too early to say. There is a lot that will be happening on the international level during the General Assembly. A lot of discussions. More countries will join, others will not. Every individual states will take positions, what they can, what they cannot do. So to me, honestly, it's a little bit too early to see if the coalition will help on addressing all the injustices in Iraq or in Syria. I wish it can be done, but for the moment I cannot other than wish and hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor is open for further comments or questions. I'll take one or two. Yes, please, in the very back.
Hello, my name is Rasmus Jacobsen. I work as an analyst and a security consultant. My question is this. In the follow-up question by moderator Hudson for specific policy advice, both ambassadors recommended increasing support for the Lebanese National Army. Rami mentioned that all Arab countries suffer from a lack of answers to basic questions of state building, including the relationship between the state and the army. If the Lebanese army's role and relationship to the state is not clearly defined or influenced by Lebanese citizens, is it a good idea to further empower the Lebanese army?
Thank you. Yes, please.
My name is Filippo Gradian, a new fellow here at the Sam Faris Institute and the UN official. I have a question which I guess is for everybody, and I want to just go back to Rami's first point on what he identified as the key issue underlining or going across the crisis in the region, which is a broken or failed or non-existent relationship between the individual and the state. I couldn't agree more with that particular analysis, but my question is, then where do we start? I know it's a big question, probably requiring another 2 hours of debate, but the question is, where do we start in order to promote, I wouldn't say restoring that relationship because it may never have existed, but establishing that particular relationship? There have been in this region, at least in the time I've been in this region for the past 10, 15 years, experiments in elections. Many went very wrong. Think of Palestine in 2006, think of Egypt just a couple of years ago, and in Libya and many others. Those are experiments in traditional democracy. Then elections and so forth. Then there's been an attempt by the people to redefine that relationship in the so-called Arab Spring. That hasn't progressed in the way we all thought it may have progressed back in 2011. So my question is really for everybody, can we reflect a little bit more on that? Because I think it's really the key problem. Because all the rest, military intervention, autocracy, are the traditional responses, and as Rami said in his second intervention, they don't seem to work, and their combination is literally deadly. So I think it would be useful to have a few thoughts on this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more. Yes, please.
Thank you. Hussein Itani, Middle East Prospect Forum, the think tank. I have two questions actually, one related to Lebanon in specific and one for the region. So as for the first one, I can recall maybe Mr. Jean-Paul Chamy can relate to that. In 2007 and 8, when I was involved in peace building workshops, when we used to use the term peace, it always meant peace with Israel back then. So it was very refuted by many participants. And the word peace, with time, has deviated or changed with the perception of it. And now when we say the word peace, for instance, in Tripoli, you mean peace with Jabal Mahsen or Tibani? No, we don't want that. So for that reason, maybe we can start reflecting on not having prospect for peace in troubled region, maybe prospect for justice. Because when you used to say, let's forget about peace and let's talk about justice, everyone wants to hop into the discussion. But peace, no one wants to talk about peace. So here's the question about Lebanon. If the international community was able to push the regional governments for a peace Ta'if agreement, why weren't they pushed for transitional justice for Lebanon? So that's the first part. The second part is about the EU and the US relation. So we have noticed that in the past couple of years, there were some sort of timid action towards resolving the conflict in Syria and Iraq and all of this. So there's some sort of a laissez-faire policy in that sense. This is at least my perception. So is this because of the different visions between the US and EU towards peace in the region? And why we didn't say real action unless there were minorities attacked or nationals from this coalition who is now fighting ISIS? So is this a laissez-faire policy which led you to this? So between the US and Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have three interventions. Who would like to respond to any or all of them? How about Jean-Paul?
I'll be buying some time to prepare my answer, but obviously not. I think I just have two quick comments on two of the asked questions. I think when it comes to the connotation that a word such as peace has, I think I'll just take it one step further and say that every single word has a connotation in our society. Because of the different vécu, again, because of the different past experiences, we tend to associate them differently. And whether we like it or not, the emotional dimension is there because it's also connected emotionally to something that has happened to my community because of the other community that I eventually developed this different relationship with this specific word. So yes, peace has always been pretty much charged emotionally as a word, but many others as well, including the word justice as well. So I think, but I fully agree with you, Hussein, on the importance of at times, changing the terminologies at times, which makes a very, very big presence. In our work in the local, on the local level, we've noticed that. Instead of using, for example, the word conflict, the term conflict resolution, which somehow translates to our minds in Arabic, حل النزاع, حل is just as if we're just pressing the undo button and then everything comes back to normal, which is never the case. So we've realized that people are not fine using this type of terms, and hence the need for many labs or many attempts to start speaking local. Not only the actual dialect, but also speaking the local mindset. And for that, we need a lot of translation work, social translation work. And in order for us to do this, we need to really build a lot of ties, a lot of relationships with those different communities. That in my previous presentation, I mentioned that many of them feel alienated and de-associated from the whole country. And one of them recently, in a conversation that I was having with him, told me, Jean-Paul, I'm 65 years old, and I've never felt that my area, and he's from Ankara, is actually part of Lebanon. So he was asking me, are we still part of Lebanon? And he was very, very serious about that. So also the importance of having this translation work and this ongoing conversation happening also vertically and across the different agencies that are trying to do this type of work, because each agency speaks a certain language, and it's very much important to facilitate a lot of the conversations and a lot of the thinking behind the doing that leads to projects, programs, and decisions and strategies and so on and so forth, which to a very big extent local communities have almost nothing to do with that. I think even NGOs and the civil society in Lebanon does not really have a major say in how those strategies are being designed and formulated. So yes, the need for having more participatory work, not only on the local level, but also amongst all of the actors of change as well. I think when it also comes to the importance of building relationships and where do we start and where not, I do have several experiences. I think one of them is very, very fresh from Libya, where I've been doing some work since 1.5 years now. And I've realized in this specific context, the Libyan context, the importance of relationship, and also the importance of the fact that communities will always revert back to what they know the most. 42 years later, the communities in Libya know the thing that they know the most is being back to trusting their tribal affiliation, family and tribal, al-ashira wal-abila wal-aila. So, and with a lot of efforts, international efforts to support Libya, many of these efforts had too many of high expectations, wanting things to be fine in 2 or 3 years' time, in a community that for 42 years hasn't had the chance to take part in the proper consultative decision making and so on. And then one of my conversations with one of the directors of a local NGO in Libya, we've kind of agreed to the importance of, at times, giving communities, giving countries the space to really digest what they have been going through. And this sometimes, and in most cases, never really happens. 42 years later, this person, Fatki, was saying, we probably need a few years, maybe 5 to 10 years, to really understood what was going on. And people need some of that chance to heal, some of that chance to make some sense, not only intellectually, but also sometimes emotionally vent. So, and hence also the need for having this parallel track of emotional expression and also the need for people to be heard as well. So, and as for this, $1 million question of where do we start? I think it's just everywhere, but not everywhere unless there's a strategy, and not everywhere unless the actors of change are talking to each other and are willing to see what could be possibly done. And on a very last note, again on the microscopic level, in our work with communities, at times there will be a problem, like let's say conflict over the irrigation of lands in certain areas in Arsal, for example. And we would be grouping like 19 or 20 of the most important key local figures, and they would be talking to each other. They would present 20 amazing creative solutions to the problem. And then we realized that none of them is a good enough solution, because none of these solutions have been has undergone a consultative process and a participatory process, and there is not sufficient trust at times amongst themselves to be able to say, wait, I'll just let go of my solution and I'm willing to give your solution the benefit of the doubt so that we start working on that. I think at times, even though we're working in a lab, using a microscope and looking at, small things, small events and trying to connect the dots, in most cases it ends up, resonating in our minds the same issues, the same constraints and problems and challenges that on the meso level, on the higher macro level, and also on the national and international level, I think are being very much vocalized and portrayed as well.
Thank you. And who else on the panel would like to comment on the interventions that we made?
Maybe something on democracy. Democracy is not perfect, it's ever evolving, so I think people voting they get elected the people they have chosen, and in many ways in Europe there's a lot of challenges also in the fact that we're seeing a rise in the extreme right in Europe, and many countries that have the system where the threshold for entry into parliament is very low, get a plethora of parties entering, and this forces everybody to form coalitions and therefore maybe limit the extent of the influence of some radical parties. But democracy, I don't see any other option open. I don't see how we can forward any other solution. And maybe I wanted also to add something on Lebanon and the army. I think that all of us here understand the need for the strengthening of the Lebanese army. We're all trying to do our bits, small or larger, depending to the country. And it is a recognized actor that is needed to be strengthened in order to help Lebanon survive these difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
2 quick points. Yes, the army needs to be supported, Rasmus, not because the role is not well defined, it's very well defined. And there's really very good already ongoing cooperation between the LAF and many member states, others. Here is a real professional institution in itself, doing a job but needing much more capability and capacity. And if you would not have that, what you have already today, I would doubt at the actual security situation of Lebanon today. You need to strengthen the army by hook or crook. I know what your question is alluding to, but that is also being dealt with, and it is very important to make sure that the army can function without political influence, without all of the other concerns people may have, and that they can basically do their job. On Hussein's point of Filippo, I leave you to Rami because you address it to Rami, but Hussein mentioned mostly about this idea that we laissez faire the region. You know, it's not a fair assessment. Laissez faire really means that you don't engage at all, and that is what some people advocate. Leave us alone. Stay away from us. You know, I cannot judge that. Could perhaps be a good idea. That just everybody really then truly withdraws and that people sort things out. You know, that's another debate. But there have at least been so many efforts to not let everybody do in the region what he wants to do. Rami alluded to it, to the mistakes that have been made. We tend not to look at the good examples, but Tunisia is a good example. Tunisia has functioning institutions, and Tunisia has many other elements that make it a potential really good example of this. But you said the US and the EU have not been really working enough together on how does that work. Look, the United States and the European Union is we are strategic partners. And that goes back for many reasons and why that is. We tend to think, and we believe that we present the same values. We differ on how. We differ on how on foreign policy issues, on the issues. I mean, there's a reason why the United States has a huge defense budget, and the reason why we are the biggest humanitarian assistance or development assistance. You know, there are reflections there. And that is, I mean, that's all healthy, but in a way, that model of freedom of expression, of mind, the whole concept of what humanity is and citizenship and civil state, all these issues bring us very close. The European Union, the member states, and the United States. There's no doubt about it. That doesn't mean that the European Union doesn't have an own policy and that we run every time after the United States. I'm sorry, it's just give me clear examples and say exactly where that has happened, and I can bet with you I will be able to refute it, because it's not the case. But what we want, for the reasons I just gave, and there are many other reasons, we definitely have an interest that we work well together. But the policy of both European Union and United States in this region, for instance, there are a lot of differences. And we discuss these openly also. And they know, United States know where we differ, and we know where they're different. And that is a relationship you need to be able to have with our partners.
Okay. Rami, go ahead, please.
A couple of quick comments. I think the Lebanese army working now much more efficiently and coordinating with Hezbollah and coordinating with international security agencies, intelligence agencies, has brought a whole new spirit to Lebanon of a sense that somebody is actually working hard to protect the country, and there's massive support for this in Lebanon, and it's a very important phase of the country's development. The critical point is to make sure that the armed forces remain under civilian control, or somehow are responsive to a consensus in the country of what's the role of the army. This is, if you ask me what's the single biggest problem for the mediocre nature of Arab governance starting in the 1950s, it's the military control of the government. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. There's other problems, Israel, the US and Europe and foreign people and whatever, but its military control of government has been a catastrophe. And it's still a catastrophe in many Arab countries. So I think the strengthening of the Lebanese army is a great, important deed, which has huge support, and is still in its early days. One of the problems, of course, is when Lebanon needs some things for its armed forces, the Israelis have to tell the American Congress to approve it if the arms are coming from the US. If they're coming from Europe, there's less clear constraints there, but the Arab-Israeli conflict again comes back into the region. That the security of Israel and the current state of Israel is a policy of many Western countries, not all of them, and it impacts on what Arab countries can do, and it constrains Arab sovereignty. And and the legitimate self-defense needs at times. So that's a problem. On the two other questions, which I think go together about where to start and how to make the progress on getting better citizen-state relations and more normal, productive, stable, and equitable societies, and the issue of peace or justice for Lebanon. I think what we have in the last 3.5, 4 years, since the uprisings began, it was the first time ever in modern Arab history when we could actually hear ordinary people telling us what they were bothered by and what they wanted, their grievances and their aspirations. And if you go back and analyze what people were saying in their placards and in their slogans and in their media writings and in public speaking and everything, there was massive demand across the region by ordinary citizens for a bunch of abstract nouns like dignity, like respect, like justice, like accountability. They were not asking for power, for wealth, for revenge. They wanted dignity, respect, justice, trust. They wanted their life to have meaning. All of the complaints and all of the demands and aspirations and rights of ordinary people expressed through hundreds of millions of people in various ways were about fixing a broken relationship between the citizen and the government, between the citizen and the state. So I would focus first on understanding what those issues are, and we're doing some work here. Actually, we have a project on social justice here at IFI, which we're working on a project on dignity, to understand those two meanings from people across the region. And the second thing is, this region, with all my respect and love for Europe, has the oldest tradition of settled human civilization. We have a lot to learn from Europe, but we have 7,000 to 9,000 years of settled community life. You go back to the Neolithic villages, some of them here in Lebanon. People have lived at the local level for 7,000 to 9,000 years, from 7,000 BC roughly, until now. There's an extraordinary legacy of wisdom, tolerance, pluralism, coexistence, that is in the chromosomes of people all over the Middle East, the Levant especially, but also Turkey and other places, and Iran. And that's one of the places I think where people should start to go, and this is one of the things I think the local peace building projects can do, which is working at the local level to understand why is it that Sunnis and Shiites intermarry, and Christians and Muslims have businesses together, and Kurds and Turks have football clubs together, and people who are fighting at a national level or not able to meet at a national level are doing perfectly well at a local level. And they intermarry, they have friends, they have business partners, neighbors. So this tradition of coexistence and respect at the local level needs to be somehow brought up to the national level, and that's very difficult to do. But I think it's one of the places to start. There are institutions in society that I think have never been fully tapped. The business community, religious leaderships, traditional tribal leaderships. I think these people who are anchored in the community can play a much bigger role in pushing the established political systems, which are pretty incoherent and part of the problem of stresses. These other institutions grounded in society and local people can push these national institutions, I think, forward, but we haven't figured out, nobody knows exactly how to do that. I think that's one of the things that some of the projects like you're doing, Jean-Paul, but these local level projects should be designed, as I'm sure yours is, to learn from the local people about how tolerance actually works and to understand what the fears are so that there can be a better balance. But it's a long-term process. This process took, Europe took 500 years from the Magna Carta to the French Revolution. It's a long time to institutionalize certain democratic principles. And it's going to take us not that long, but I think this is a process that has to start.
Thank you. I think we have time maybe for one last round of questions. So I'll take 2 or 3, and then I want to give the panelists a chance for any final remarks they have, and perhaps Professor Hazmoun will want to say some concluding words as well.
So, yes, there's a question in the back, please.
I'd like to thank you first for your interventions. I think it's a bit out of the subject, but I kind of wonder why there is so much emphasis put on electing a president for Lebanon. Because as we all know, the electricity, the people are always, they're not getting paid, they don't want to work, they don't go to work, resulting in us having no electricity and problems. Now we have the water problems, of course, which is no sustainable plan of the government for resources in Lebanon. And we are the richest country in the region with water, and we seem to be losing all this water like that because we haven't done a plan. So my point is, nothing is working, nothing. Especially for me, as being a young person living in this country, nothing is working. So why do we care so much about having a president? He doesn't have a role diplomatically. He's just, I don't know, he just gives speeches. So, oops. Yeah, so that's my question. Like, and everybody seems so obsessed with Lebanon doesn't have a president. Well, we didn't have a government for some time, which is even worse. And even if we do have a government, they don't do anything. So.
I have to intervene just and tell you an anecdote that an old friend of mine who has passed away, Professor Hassan Saab, a Lebanese political scientist, told me once that Lebanon gave 3 great gifts to world civilization: a purple dye, the alphabet, and a state without government. Another question. Yes, please.
Question is
could you wait for the microphone, please?
My name is Nadine, and my question is kind of related with the previous one, and it is addressed to Mr. Mavromatis. I was wondering, how come, knowing that the Islam is coming from religious background, how can we claim that managing resources such as oil and gas be suitable or maybe the right movement to fight extremism? I'm not aware of the situation of ISIS in Lebanon, but as for Syria, they have already seized the oil fields in the eastern part of Syria, and I don't know how are the politicians who share responsibility be able to think of any possible solution, knowing that the resources that we are talking about are in the hands of Islamists.
Thank you. One more? Yes, please.
Raised a valid point.
Please wait for the microphone. Here it comes.
You raised a very good point about the dysfunctional relationship between the state and the citizens. In Europe, the word that's generally used is nation state. So the question is, how do you create a responsible state if its citizens do not perceive themselves as a nation? Can you have a responsible state if you're not a nation?
Thank you. And there was a question over here. Yes, please. Yeah.
My name is Mahmoud Shabib. I work in Care International, and my work is all about the Syria response. So I was actually interested in going back to Ms. Angelina Eckhart's point about peace and how it's, although it is a very important subject and it's unfortunately the base of all the conflicts that are happening, it's never news and it's never an interesting subject, neither to the public nor to, maybe, I don't know, decision makers or whoever. So, and in relation to what Mr. Jean-Paul Chamy said about the sort of desensitization of the community, it's also related to peace. So what would be your recommendation on, tackling peace in a way that would bring it to people's interest, because it is interesting to everyone, I must say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no further comments, I will turn back to the panel. We just have a few minutes left for responses to these questions and any final remarks you might have. So where shall we start? Would you like to start, please?
No problem. I think that on the first issue about why so much insistence on the election of the president, I think this comes back to other debates we had in the past before the prolongation of the mandate of the presidency, and one big issue in Lebanon, that the people should start voting at 18. I think it's important because then they will raise their concerns about what they want in Lebanon, because at this stage they're not able to do so until they turn 21. On the issue of the resources and in the hands that they were, this was an idea that was put forward by my foreign minister concerning oil and gas in the Mediterranean and the cooperation among all the countries in the region, in order exactly to use this opportunity for prosperity, and not to use it to find ourselves facing this as an issue of conflict between the neighboring countries. It's a noble idea which maybe now with the events in the Middle East is easily forgotten, but I think it will come back, and it's maybe the only way forward in order to really use prosperity to provide all the badly needed elements for healthy societies in the region. I wanted also maybe to mention two other things. There is the need, as we said, to strengthen the army. There are now politicians also talking about the draft being brought back in Lebanon also. And these are all issues that will be affecting the youth in the coming years. And I wanted to conclude maybe by using a quotation I had in my speech by Mother Teresa, that peace starts with a smile. And I think that at the end of the day, we have to really do our best to enforce peace, especially in this very troubled, and as Rami said, an area with a long history. Cyprus, we include ourselves when we mention this, in the Levant and in the early civilizations of the Mediterranean. And we have learned to live together. We want to continue living together. And I think that if we're allowed on the micro level, on the local level, we will find solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jean-Paul? Yes?
On why peace is boring and so much unsexy. And this has actually, in many spheres discussing peace, and this has always been the case, because any act of violence is, very much interesting and makes it on the news. While it takes a lot of effort for an act of peace to make it on the news. So I think it requires a lot of things. One of them is creativity. It has to be something creative, really outside the box, that can make it to the news. So if it's linked to something related to peace, that would be nice. But I think that the interesting part, and what can make it interesting, is something that has to be collective. Normally, any act that celebrates the achievement of a collectivity is what usually makes it to the news. Let's say, 10,000 people shouting the word peace at the same time should make it to the news, I guess. If not, maybe 100,000, I don't know. But, it's always the weight that numbers can actually have. And also having people organized along that way. But also, again, what is peace in that sense? And if we, pass a small piece of paper to each one of you and us here and ask, what is the equivalent of peace, or what does it mean? We will probably find very, very different understandings, ranging from justice to safety to security to food. It always depends on how we are perceiving this very specific notion. So, and then the other issue is media, of course. We also need people who are willing to go and look for instances where a certain conflict did not really escalate into violence, where certain people, by doing something or by refraining from doing something, eventually created this instance of lack of violence and rapprochement between different people. And this is the challenge of documenting and presenting on what didn't happen rather than what actually happened. But also maybe for a very last message is to look at peace not only as the absence of war and absence of violence, but also the establishment of institutions, of structures, of infrastructures that can further sustain and support this a certain lasting moment of non-violence and of collective and cooperative and non-violent solutions to specific issues. And this probably requires us to listen at a deeper level and not only be taken by everything that we are seeing on the top of the iceberg, but also by looking at what is making it. What is happening today that, for example, in one of the Palestinian camps in Lebanon, there is no actual fighting happening? Because if you go there, in 3 minutes max, you should be experiencing your very first conflict. So, because of the density of the population, the very small space that is available, limited resources, and so on. But still, so this is why at times we try to give voice to people who are doing this type of work. And one of the things that we will be trying to suggest to our current funders in the future is to try and give more voice to those initiatives that are already happening, even without the supports of funders and of the government, that are already mitigating a lot of tensions. And these are happening, but it requires us to be more careful and more attentive and more listening to these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Eckhorst. Final words?
A lot of ideas there from Jean-Paul also on peace. I like it very much, and I think you're actually very good at that in Lebanon, because you mobilize very often, huge marathon now for peace and all that. And there's going to be a peace chain, I was told, from Tripoli to Tyre in November, people holding hands. I mean, these are actions you really, I think, and you do that marvelously. And we need to shout. We really need, we're too silent about it. It's very true. We need to find creative ways of doing that. And I picked up a few for Jean-Paul. I think that's a very good message to take back and to work on. Just one word on the president. To me, from the outside, with a humble perspective, it gives a message that this country cannot get its act together, that you can't agree, that there's no willingness to, as was said earlier, to give in, to compromise, to work on a consensus. It gives a complete message abroad to apathy, sitting back, letting things happen, dilution, that is a famous approach used also by politicians, not wanting to solve the issues, not wanting to take responsibility. I mean, these are the messages, and what I'm saying here, it's not something I don't say elsewhere also, but I'm saying it as an observer. I'm not doing this work here. This is the work that needs to be done by the politicians here in Lebanon and by civil society. I understand your point that the president doesn't bring you electricity, but I don't think that is a reason for you to say, then why do we need a president? Why would we need a president? Because then you lose exactly that faith in the possibility of having those institutions. I mean, there's a reason why a country has a president, man or woman, doesn't matter, or a king or queen, but and there is the legislative, there is the executive. That there is a reason for that. And that goes back to ancient Greek times and even Mesopotamian times, Rami. And if you do not believe in that very, very setup, we were discussing all over the institutions and the security part, then you cannot believe in that concept of citizenship, civil state, dignity, justice. So I'm bringing it very big now, but it is really essential to give a message to the outside world, at least from my perspective, but even more so, I would think, to the people living in Lebanon, that this is something we can handle, and regardless of what happens in the whole region, we have functioning institutions. And by having that seat empty, you are basically saying we don't need it.
And that is a dangerous message. At this point in time, when vacuums are being filled by elements and peoples, you don't want to fill these vacuums.
Thank you.
I think a common thread that runs through a lot of what we've discussed today is really the issue of the individual citizen's perception that he or she is being treated decently by his or her own society, sense of justice. I think if there's one word that I think is the most important word in the modern Arab world, it's justice. And the second most important word is legitimacy. In other words, the legitimacy of governing institutions, and they're legitimate if they get the consent of their citizens. And if the citizens give consent and validate the governing institutions, you have a legitimate system of power exercise and accountability, and citizens feel safe, and therefore they have normal, productive, decent society. This is the transition that Europe made from the 15th to the 19th, 20th century. It took time, but we finally did it. The Americans are still in the process. They've pretty much achieved most of those things, but there's still problems here and there in every country. The Arab countries have never had a chance to do this, and the issue of citizenship, statehood, and nationhood is an important issue. Many countries in the world are not natural nation states, but they're very successful countries. You look at Singapore, you look at other countries, because their citizens feel that they're treated reasonably decently, their basic rights are met, and therefore they behave as citizens, they obey the law, pay taxes, etc. You have nations that are not states, like, for instance, the Kurdish nation. That should be a state, but it's not, but it hopefully will be one day. And most countries that come into being, eventually to be stable, must be validated by their own citizens. And you can have countries like the United States or Canada, that's where people come from all over the place, and they do genocide, they do slavery, and they do terrible things, but eventually they settle down and behave and actually apply the rule of law, and then everybody's happy and you have a stable society with a dark history, but all of us have dark histories. But the key in the end is a sense of justice that is equally applied, the equal application of the rule of law. If that can happen, then you get these stable societies and people don't go to extremism. And that's the key, I think, to what people have done at the local level for thousands and thousands of years. They disagree with each other, but they treat each other with respect, and people understand that their basic rights are met, and they have to do something in return to respect the rights of others. We've just never had a chance to do that. That's the problem in the Arab world, that ordinary citizens have never had the chance to participate in that process. It's always been done by small elites, religious, ethnic, political, tribal, whatever they may be, commercial elites. Some were handpicked by European fading colonial powers, some just imposed themselves on the region. That's why the transition in Iraq is so important, Angelina mentioned. I mean, we have to watch. Iraq and Yemen strike me as the two most important places to watch in the short run now. If these two countries can make these transitions with governments that are inclusive and that are shaped by a consultative process, this can be really a powerful drive forward. I think it will happen because those of us who live in this region and know ordinary people around the Arab world, we know that they're all decent, good people. They're not fanatics, but they become fanatics and they become criminals by the conditions that they're forced to endure. And so we've got to end that process and go back to the basic issues of that peace comes from justice. And justice, as God told us in the book of Deuteronomy, pursue justice and only justice. Justice must be, for those of you who believe God, for those of you who believe Elvis, it's the same thing. Pursue peace, pursue justice and only justice. And justice has to be the foundation for peace building, statehood, and a happy life.
Thank you very much. I think we owe a debt of thanks to all four participants for extremely enlightening, stimulating commentaries. So may we give them a round of applause. Then I think we should say thank you to the sponsors, the co-sponsors of this event, which I think are as I understand it, the European Union delegation and the American University of Beirut. I'm not quite sure which institutions are doing this, but perhaps Professor Azboun, who introduced the session, would like to have a word at the very end.
Yeah, again, want to thank all the audience and the panelists, and invite you to the reception area for some beverages afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The reception next door.